Good morning. We are in our final week of the Growing More and More Like Him series. And this morning we get to hear from Scott Johnson. Many of you know Scott Johnson. He was a pastor here for several years. He's married to Marcia, and they have 6 children, almost 19 grandchildren, 18 and 1 on the way. So a great family in our community. Scott was the principal out at Nebraska Christian when I was hired here as a pastor back in 2005. He's been a teacher, he's been a coach, still coaches cross country out at Nebraska Christian. But when I was hired here, he was an elder. And one of the interesting things about Scott is he was quickly likable. He's somebody that as soon as I met him, I trusted him and I admired him. But he was the principal out at Nebraska Christian. Well, shortly after I began as a pastor, I opened up a search process for an associate pastor. I knew I needed another person right away. And one Sunday morning, Scott came up to me and said, "I'm considering a change in careers." And I said to Scott, "That sounds great. What are you thinking about?" And he smiled at me and he said, "Well, I'm actually thinking about becoming a pastor." And I remember that morning, in that moment, thinking, well, you'd be a fantastic pastor. And I was even thinking to myself, man, some church is really going to be fortunate to have Scott. And just didn't put it together that Scott was actually telling me that he was interested in possibly being a pastor at Heartland. And so as soon as I realized that, prayed about that, involved other people, but we hired Scott right away. And so he was the first pastor that I got to hire after coming to Heartland. Scott was a perfect colleague in so many ways. I can't imagine enjoying serving alongside somebody more than I did Scott. One of the things about Scott as a pastor is that I was young when I was first hired. I was 34 years old. I was new. People were right to not trust me entirely at that point. And so Scott, being an elder, being a very trusted member of our community, when he came on staff, it really brought a deeper sense of trust to the entire pastoral team, the staff at Heartland. And it's hard to put to words what that has meant for our church, especially in those early years. We were able to do a lot of neat things and see God do a lot of great work at Heartland, largely because of who Scott is and how our community views him. So I could go on and on about Scott. He's one of my favorite people. He's certainly one of the men that I most look up to and admire. And so I'm excited for us this morning to hear Scott teach on how to grow more and more like Jesus in our social relationships.